right information at the right time is a portal from where you are to where you want to be. And I'm your host, Beth Orr, and today we have the pleasure of being here with my friend, Joon Park. And I'm going to give your official bio from your Instagram, your official bio, and then I'm going to give my intro, yeah. Right? So on Instagram, Joon has that he is a hospital chaplain, does grief support, is a Korean American, 6th-degree black belt, son to immigrants, an ex-atheist, follows Christ, and has a new book out in May of 2024, which is really exciting. We're going to get to here in a bit. But I actually met Joon in the last organization that we both worked in, which is Metropolitan Ministries here in Tampa, Florida. And we became not only colleagues, but friends during the several years that we worked together. And I appreciate Joon because I see you as somebody who has so much compassion and kindness and integrity and a beautiful capacity to be fully present with whoever you're in front of. Like you just share this sacred space with people that is just a real gift. So I appreciate that with Joon. And it's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on is because of a mutual topic that we both tend to see in our work, but manifests and shows up differently given the different choices that we have in our work. And that's grief as well as connection, I think kind of comes up for both of us. So as a chaplain, can you just describe to people what that means? Because I don't think everybody has a sense of what that work entails and what your day-to-day looks like.
Yeah. Beth, first of all, I'm very happy to be here with you in person. Yeah. And if I can brag on you for like 10 seconds. Okay. Because we work together. Right. And you are the real deal. I mean, behind the scenes, with people, for people, you're incredible at what you do.
Thank you.
So everybody watching, listening needs to know that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, because I've worked with amazing and incredible people. I've been very lucky. And you are one of those people that really, really stand out in my mind as a voice who inspires, encourages, who has stayed with me.
Thank you.
I want everyone to know that.
Thank you.
We worked almost 3 years together.
We did.
Yeah.
And very closely. Like we would
close. We saw each other like every day almost.
We did. Yeah.
I think. Yeah. And even during the pandemic where we weren't in the office and stuff, we stayed in touch. And
we did.
So I'm very happy to be here. I just needed to say that up front.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, what a chaplain does. So I guess the technical clinical definition would be non-anxious, non-judgmental, comforting presence. And so I think when people think of chaplain, it may be sort of a religious figure. Right. And there's some of that is included in there. But whereas pastors or ministers preach and impart information, chaplains act as a presence. We're a presence just to be with. We're not imposing, we're not imparting information, but we enter into where the person is in their condition, illness, injury, in their grief, and meet them where they are.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, so we're not putting anything on them, but we're entering into the space in the world that they inhabit. And so pastors and ministers, and I did pastoral ministry for some time, I think that's needed to give and preach framework, to give structure, to, I guess, impart their beliefs. Right. But chaplains are incredibly important in that we can navigate within any space. I see people of any background, any tradition, any faith background or faith upbringing. And so the work that I do in the hospital, I'm in a 1,000+ bed hospital, level 1 trauma center. And so I'll see patients we get called to every death. We get called to those who are dying, end-of-life situations. We do end-of-life support. Okay. At a level 1 trauma center, when we get traumas, which include gunshot wounds, stabbings, fire, fall, strokes, accidents, I get called to offer support to the patient. Okay. That's assuming they're awake and alert. And often I make the phone call to family. I look for family, and then I'm the one who says your loved one is here at the hospital. So we do a wide range of things. At the hospital that I'm at, they have chaplains probably within a lot of different places that maybe a chaplain at another hospital the military wouldn't necessarily be a part of. And, you know, when you and I worked together, I did staff care for our staff, almost, I think, 300 employees at Metropolitan Ministries. And so that work was also very different than the hospital work. But the hospital, it's like a little mini city because it's 1,000 beds. I'm constantly moving, and it's constantly crisis.
Right.
And so the grief that I see is extreme. It's like the worst moment of someone's life. It's the day of, it's the moment of. And so as a chaplain, I'm there to be a presence to be with.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So we're good at boundaries. We get taught how to have boundaries, but the reality is as compassionate human beings, we're in that shared space with somebody. We're literally energetically choosing to sit with someone, which is why somebody oftentimes responds back to you. And I know this from being with you, because I don't sense you having a wall. Like, I sense you as being very pliable and very with, and your energy is in that space that allows for somebody to be present and feel fully what they're experiencing. So I'm curious, given the intensity of it, like, what called you to do what you're doing? Like, why are you doing what you're doing?
Yeah, I think if you hit like 10 seconds ago, when you said we're good at boundaries, I smiled a little bit because I was like,
right.
I think I read somewhere boundaries start at your skin, because there are physical boundaries that we have. But being in the room, taking on grief, maybe just the kind of person or chaplain that I am, I'm very permeable. I'm one of those, I guess, healthcare workers, or just one of those people. I can't leave work at work.
Yes.
Yeah. So boundaries as far as maintaining like provider-patient roles, maybe I have that down a little bit, but the grief part, the emotion part, that is incredibly, it's overwhelming. Yeah, the work that we do. And you know that at doing therapy, there are some patients you can't stop thinking about, some clients that they just, their stories stick, But I feel like I've lost your question. Ask your question one more time.
Yeah, no worries. Like, I was just asking about why you do the work that you're doing.
Yeah, and maybe part of my answer was in that. I think when I was growing up, it turned out, I found out much later, I'm a 9 out of 10 on the ACE score.
Okay.
And the ACE score is adverse childhood experiences.
Right.
So there's like a 10-question questionnaire that asks different things like, did you ever see your parents hitting each other? Was anyone in your family ever in jail for a prolonged time or something? There's these 10 questions that basically are asking, as a child, did you experience these traumatic experiences? And I didn't know I was a 9 out of 10. And so a 4 or more is correlated with having health issues.
Right.
So that was wonderful work done by, I think, the Kaiser Institute, and then Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, her book, The Deepest Well. Really, really hard read, but a necessary read, I think, on trauma. And so a 4 or more on the ACE score, it's supposed to be like you have 1,000% more chance of getting depression and heart disease and even brittle bones or loss of impulse control and things like that. So being a 9 out of 10 on the ACE score, I found out much later, that seems to be like I'm doomed. But then I also learned Dr. Rachel Yehuda, who she talks about resilience. And she does work on the ACE score and trauma. And she did a whole study on children of survivors of the Holocaust and how even that legacy of trauma can be passed down.
Right.
And then I think in an interview she was asked, so then those who experience trauma, are they just doomed? And she talked about, no, we're not doomed. It's difficult to overcome. It's difficult to work through, but there is a thing called resilience. And so for me, I think I got into this work because I wanted to be the voice and presence that I didn't have growing up. Because there's another study for PCEs, positive childhood experiences, and it's 7 markers of someone in their childhood who had at least these 7 things that they can grow up to have resilience, that they can grow up to have good recovery and coping skills. Right. And I think one of those was 2 non-parent adults in your life who are basically speaking into you, whether that's mentoring or coaching or inspiring, someone there who's a presence. And I know my parents, as we say, they did the best they could with what they knew how. Sometimes, parentheses, I'm like, did they?
Mm-hmm.
I hope that they did. I think they did. And I've since reconciled with them. But I didn't always have that voice in my own life. If anything, negative and often traumatizing and debilitating voices.
Right.
And so if I can be there at in someone's crisis, in the moment of, sometimes having that presence there can be a buffer so that that person's post-traumatic growth, that there's a foundation there. Because very often what we are told or what we experience in the moment of crisis becomes the bridge by which we walk out of that trauma or through that trauma. And so even the little things that we're told can sort of set that grounding.
Yes.
And sometimes those things can be harmful. And other times those things can be ways in which we can then navigate through a very difficult situation. So my patients may never remember my face or even the specific words that I said, may never remember my name or my role. And all of that is okay. Because if I can act as that sort of buffer point, that sort of presence, I can be for that person what I needed growing up.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's like Maya Angelou says, they won't remember what you say or you do, but they'll remember how you made them feel.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. And so it also sounds like what you're describing is, it's reparative, what you're doing. You're getting into the work of not only providing what you would have wished that somebody would have provided to you at that particular juncture when things were happening in your life, but I'm wondering if there isn't a reparative element for yourself even to providing this, right? Like for me, I've been doing some work around inner child, and I just can't even begin to tell you the number of times, like since I've put it out there, is the younger version of me, that younger version of me, have they had an adequate opportunity to have their true voice heard?
Yeah.
And it's almost like sometimes we talk about in the field, and I wonder if you talk about this in your own field, of we do the work that we need, right? So we are involved in the things that we, like whatever you needed as a child, you're now giving to other people in those moments of needs. But I'm wondering how there are parts of ourselves that are repaired by the work that we're doing with other people.
Yeah, I can say, as a chaplain, and now as a parent, as a dad of a well, gosh, she's 3.5 now.
I can't believe that.
Yeah, there's so much that I've felt that I've re-parented myself as I'm parenting. Things that I've missed or things I didn't know were even missing that have helped me to, I guess, return to myself.
Right.
And so things that I am as a dad, that I can be as a dad, where I'm like, I didn't get to do these things or experience these things as a child, but for my daughter I can. And for my patients, there's the thought that I never want them to feel as alone as I did.
Right.
And there is certainly reactions within myself, parts of their story that touch my story.
Right.
There's reactions and things I see in my daughter's face where I'm like, it reminds me of this thing. But there's a certain sense in which I believe we can do healing work in the fields of healthcare and therapy. We can, in ministry, all of it, we can do healing work in a way that isn't a projection or externalization of what we want to heal in ourselves. But there is a healing work in which we're called to that can still incidentally end up healing us.
Yes.
Yeah, not as the primary goal,
right,
but almost as this tangential, tertiary, incidental thing that happens, where it's like, you ever left a session, I'm sure this has happened, you left a session where you gave, you provided therapy, but you feel healed at the end of it somehow, where you're like, I did good work. And in some way, their story or the way that we were able to talk through that, I'm feeling more whole than when I started, So there are hospital shifts where I am so drained by the end.
Right.
But then there's something where I'm like also so filled. Like as I poured out, I've been poured into. And it's not what I go to get, but it's what I end up getting.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that's you are always looking for a way to serve, and it's that orientation of being present with somebody. And I would imagine you do a wonderful job of preparing yourself before each shift. like it takes a lot of mental preparation before you go into serving others to make sure that we're in a space to be able to actually do that, so that we don't have our things bleed out in the sessions.
I mean, I'm lucky I have like almost an hour drive to work.
That's beautiful. Yeah,
So
I did too when I lived here.
Yeah. And then on the way home, I always go home late because I work late into the night. But that's a shorter drive home.
Yeah.
But both ways, there's preparation time.
Right.
There's a little bit of a space and buffer. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And those are important. Yeah.
So I saw a post recently, and I actually want to read it because I'm interested to kind of talk about this a little bit. You say, and this is about self-care. Yeah. And this is something that I'm really passionate about, is us taking care of ourselves. And it's also a part of the work that I'm doing now, is about like, it's really challenging for people to find what they're uniquely here to do if they're not taking care of themselves, right? Or if the work that they're doing is impacting them so much so that our stress hormones are just going off all the time, right? So your post said, lately, when I'm asked what I do for self-care, I'm honestly not really sure. I see death every week, death overseas, trying to do life too. It's a lot. There's the typical answer of diet, sleep, exercise, therapy, medication, community, nature. It helps. But sometimes I think these are just ways to tolerate a world we never should tolerate. Self-care feels like an extension of our world machine. So I don't know. I just feel everything. It hurts. I fall apart. I cannot give a soundbite answer. So when you said this, something really stuck out to me. People tend to really regurgitate the things that we know, right? Which is diet, exercise, sleep, community, people, like all of that, right? But you said, sometimes I think these are just ways to tolerate a world we never should tolerate. Tell me more about that. There seems to, like, I know you, and there's probably a lot underneath that I think is more deep than maybe even what comes out in this.
Yeah. By the way, anyone who's watching, Beth has a notebook here where you hand wrote that post and read it. Can you hold it up? Just the backside of this. Yeah. This is the notebook. This is so awesome that you've handwritten your notes. Yeah. Yeah. Because I used to handwrite my notes. Yeah. I've now converted to writing on my phone.
Okay. All right.
This is so awesome to see. I just have to point that out as kind of like this is a heavy conversation. I guess I'm trying to find the lightness.
Right. Yeah.
This is so great to me. Because you took a moment to like kind of read your own handwriting.
You're like, I'm like, oh gosh, they're right. This is hard to read.
This is so cool to see. I'm sorry, I just had to point that out. Yeah, so this is another, I guess, lasagna type feeling, right? Where self-care is critically important, and we are each, I think, designed in a way where all of our self-care is going to be different from each other. Some people love to journal, some people love to hike, some people can't stand journaling or nature, some people just want music or a movie, exercise, therapy, medication, all of those things, incredibly important for self-care. I think sometimes on two levels, self-care can almost feel like it's become industrialized on this level, where it's a little bit mercenary in the sense that it has become its own commercialized field. And then there's this other thing where I feel like the world as it is, the way that it's set up, with sort of, I guess this has also become maybe a buzzword, but sort of the capitalistic wheels of constant hustle and grind, achievement, accomplishment, both in the US and throughout the world. There's a sense in which it seems like self-care is almost a way to go back to baseline. So you just go back to work now. And so one example of this is, I won't name the program because I don't want to call out the people who made it, but there's something I did a training on, or I took the training, where it was like, go to work with a smile, it's all about your attitude. And if a customer, insults you, just give them back a smile. And the whole thing was about basically adjust your attitude. And I just thought, well, Maybe it's not so much about you need to adjust your attitude, but the corporate structure and the wages that are being paid and the benefits and the work that's being done is actually not healthy for the people working there. And people who are cranky at work probably have a right to be cranky. Is a new espresso machine and is a new massage chair in a corporate office really about self-care?
Right.
Or is it just about, here are these cute, nifty machines, but don't think about you're not going to get your vacation and higher pay and benefits to take care of yourself. So I say all that to say self-care sometimes almost feels like, you know, here's an extra thing every week to keep you going so that you stay a cog in the machine. And that's a cynical take. And at the same time, we see it happening across the world. Where if you look in your manual for work, for any workplace, corporate workplace, it'll have a thing that says bereavement time or something like that, if you lose a loved one. And you'll notice that time, it's like 2 days, 3 days, maybe a week. Most of those manuals, oh, you lose the most important person in your life, 2 days, you know, take care of yourself. Then come back to work and we expect you to produce and contribute again. Stuff like that makes me very, I just think it's not human at all. Not human and not humane. And so when people have asked me, what do you do for self-care? My answer almost feels like, I just look away from everything that's hard in the world and I do my little thing and then I go back to it. It's almost like I'm ignoring the hard things in the world, if that makes sense. Yeah, so I think self-care has to account for the fact that there is a corporate and capitalistic machine that keeps going. And that true self-care would really be these corporate structures being dismantled and restored in some way that is going to be friendly and healthy for us who are working hard. And so how do we do that? I mean, that's a long, slow process of moving the needle. I mean, that's protest and civil rights type stuff. That's necessary and needed. And even in that, there's self-care that's needed.
Absolutely.
So I guess I'm saying this big, like 30,000, you know, feet in the air type, you know, 30,000 feet above, you know, sky view type of thing. But I just, sometimes when I hear self-care, I get a little bit triggered. Because it's almost like, you know, hey, just take care of yourself and you'll be fine. And then you come back and you be the drone again. You know?
No, I'm really glad you brought this up because I feel like you give proper context to that concept. Like you get what I'm talking about when I'm talking about self-care. And I think you gave language to something that in my work, one of the things that I really am conscientious about is if you're doing something all the time to get back to that baseline, but yet you're always getting stressed. I don't believe that our nervous systems evolutionarily are meant to be getting pummeled like they are right now. We're not at a point, like as a species, I think that at some point we will adjust, but I think there's many different factors that have put too much on us on an ongoing basis. And because we have so much on us, our nervous systems were never meant to handle the amount of stress that we're handling, which is part of the problems that we're seeing right now. So if we're in environments, whether that's in our personal lives or professionally, where we're just trying to be okay, back to baseline, right? But yet the stimulus that's producing so much stress is there ongoing, and regardless, it's oftentimes due to structures or systems that are honestly just, they're also not able to handle the amount of stress that's on them. These, you know, organizational structures aren't prepared to pivot as quickly as they need to. Then the worker is the one who is the one that's kind of caught in the middle. And even blamed sometimes. And even blamed. And you said it much better than I did. I think when you see a world on fire, you know, our hope and goal is the leaders would come together to say, how can we not only put out the fire, but create a healthy place where people can survive and thrive. But instead, I think it's almost like we're told, here's a suit made of asbestos. Go back in and work.
you know, and that to me is what makes me cynical about the term self-care. Because it's like, who's telling me to take care of myself when the means and resources are not available?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's tough.
It is tough.
Yeah.
So when I left Metro, I was at a place where I was so burnt out. And we talk about compassion fatigue and burnout. And, you know, I think the amount of pressure that we see in different systems, you definitely in your position as a chaplain see a lot of, you know, things that produce a lot of stress. But when we're inundated with stress over and over and over and over again, personally, I think this is where the self-care gets down to the personal level. At some point, we have to ask ourselves, is the pressure and the stress that I'm receiving right now, if it's not going to change, what do I need to do from a self-care perspective? Like, I like reclaiming some words to say, what am I going to do for myself that's going to be firmly planted in my reality? And if my reality is such that I don't think I can keep taking this level of stress, given who I am and how I'm wired, regardless, like even if a system is shifting, it's not going to shift in time for me. And if it's affecting my health, then that's where I think our personal accountability, sometimes it can be really hard to say. There's grief that comes with, you have to make a change that you don't want to make.
Yeah.
Like, you can be in great organizations and you can be in good spaces, but sometimes if it can't shift so much so that you can see the benefit, some of self-care to me is taking that personal responsibility and saying, I've got to make a shift. I've got to make a shift for me, and then figure it out from there. Right?
Yeah, I'm sure if I were to draw out like a quadrant type grid, I think that there are people who can stay in a place that requires some resilience. And even the word resilience can be triggering for me sometimes. It's like, what are we really talking about, right? Is it to tolerate a place you shouldn't, or is it the natural strength that we need in order to, you know, make change?
Yeah.
Right? So I think there are people who are naturally called to be in a place that is difficult, but they can make waves from the inside. And so whether that's politics or healthcare or church ministry, mental health field, there are people that can go into these places that no place is perfect, but they can start to untangle knots that are there. There are sometimes people specifically hired at big corporations. I think I was reading a story of, I can't remember her name, but she was hired by Uber to fix all the problems that were there. Yeah, there was a lot of problems, you know, in that organization.
Right.
But there are people who can do that, and they're gifted at that. They have so much natural resilience that they can make waves from the inside. But then I think the other thing you were saying about burnout is there becomes a point where it's not natural, or where it's so much that it expends resources that we don't have.
Right.
And then the place for us would hit an expiration date.
Yeah.
And some people thinking, whether it's some cost, like I've already put so much into this, or I love the people that are there, there's something in our heart that tugs to stay. Some of us, and I include myself because I've been in places like this, we stay past the expiration date of knowing this place will not change and I am so burnt out.
Yeah.
And when we hit that point, there's almost like a choice we can make. Like, I am going to be reinvigorated to continue the work that I can do because I believe this place can change. Or maybe this place can change, but I don't think I'm the person for that anymore.
Right.
I have done everything that I can do and exhausted and expended all the resources that I have. And even if I had renewed energy, is it for this place anymore?
Right.
And so I'm sure there's a grid that we can draw. And even the places that we're at, there are places where they are amenable to change and they're ready and they want that change. And they welcome those people who come in with outside perspective and bring that renewed energy.
Right.
And they're like, we're glad that you're here because we want to know what's wrong. We've had goggles on here for 15 years or something. Right. But then there are other places, they want status quo. They don't ever want change. In fact, they want to go back to the good old days, right? And it's sort of the club that's on the inside that profits, and anybody else who comes in, they want their ideas or their energy, but that's about it.
Right.
And so I think every person must needs to determine that point for themselves, determines first, what are you called to? Are you called to make waves inside this place? If so, what does that look like? And what is a healthy response and an unhealthy response, both from the place and yourself? And then also determine, is there an expiration date for this place? Can your skills, gifting, ability, capacity be used elsewhere? Right. And, we'd all be lucky to have, choices like that and options like that. Not all of us are. True. Not all of us can necessarily do what we love. That's probably a whole other conversation.
Right.
But I think when you do have the choice, and sometimes we do, knowing when that is, and knowing when it's time to go and take my gifting elsewhere.
Yes.
And Beth, I'm sure you've hit that point, and you made the choice and you took it on.
Right.
And you love a place and you love the people there, but is that enough to be kept there?
Right.
For some people, yes. For some people, no.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think you're bringing up a good point too, that there's also a number of factors that go in. Nobody ever has the same choice, even if it looks like the same choice. Yeah. Nobody ever has the same choice. Yeah. There's a series of accumulated experiences that guides how they perceive the situation. So, I think it's honoring and respecting that everybody's doing the best we can, right?
Yeah.
So, another quote that you had that I wanna move on to is, and it kind of is a nice segue from.
Do you want to show everybody the notebook again? People need to see this. This is a real notebook with like handwritten notes.
Handwritten notes and lines in the pages.
It's awesome, incredible.
Okay. So the post is, what I fear is not that we are teaching children that sometimes the monsters win, but we are teaching that no one is trying to stop them. And I bring this one up because I feel like, I don't want to say now more than ever, but now is a time in our collective lives on this planet that I think we have so many things that are coming at us that need our personal attention, that we need to be really wide awake and aware of how people are suffering, of how people are, the circumstances in which they're enduring. There's just so much suffering in the world right now, and it's so important not to close our eyes to it. But I think people are challenged with, number one, feeling it all, especially as empaths, like really, truly feeling it all. But then number two, to your point here, are we teaching that no one is trying to stop them? Sometimes we're like, I can't, like I'm inundated, but yet we're called as human beings to remain connected, genuinely connected to each other, and to witness each other's suffering and to participate. So how do you, I know you're very involved politically. I've been, off and on with different causes throughout my life, and they're so important to me. But there's definitely these ebbs and flows. So what do you personally do, and kind of what's your guidance to people as far as to how do you balance taking care of yourself, but also respecting our shared humanity and need to be connected to each other? Yeah,
first, that post, when I used the word monsters, I got a few messages about it that I agreed with, that kind of called out the use of that word. Like, who are you referring to? Okay. And thought it was maybe one-dimensional, or that I was generalizing, or that I was calling out someone specific, or a specific group of people. And so I think I want to be careful in not using the word monsters to necessarily point to any one individual. A lot of it is like systemic strains of thought and history woven into the places we navigate now that can't be blamed on any one individual. Even, for example, systemic racism has been described as a river that's polluted, and how do you unpollute those waters? We can probably trace back to a history of whether that's white supremacy in the past that's sort of now become poison in the waters now, that can't be traced to any one person necessarily. So I think the use of the word monsters, I feel like I have met some monstrous people in the hospital. And what I mean by that is when I get a patient who's a victim of physical abuse, you know, I've met some people, abusers, who could be described as monsters for sure.
Right.
But I hope that use of that word, I want to be careful how I use it, because I don't want to paint anyone as irredeemable.
Right.
But I think what's so difficult about, you know, looking at these systems and looking at sort of the policies that are in place, there is so much resistance and I think a pull towards status quo because of whether that's profit-driven motives or power-driven motives. And so sometimes when something tragic occurs, for example, a mass shooting, or we see so much death and massacre overseas, when we trace back, why does this keep happening? It seems like there are certain policies and powers in place that almost seem maybe even morally neutral. Like it's hard to trace any one person that's doing that. But they're just in place because it's the way that it's always been, and it's upholding certain people's pockets and their positions.
Right.
And so what do we do? How do we fight it? And when children look at us in the future, they're going to be like, well, what did you do about this? Or was there anything that could have been done? And even when there is something done, Civil Rights Act 1964, which is now almost 60 years ago, exactly, the progress of that, there had to be vigilance in order to maintain that progress.
Right.
Because even in the last 5 years, we've seen some of these laws and policies pull back and regressed. And so what I want to be able to tell my children is that in every way that I could, whether through protest, whether through writing, art, music, all the different lanes that we occupy, all the different lanes that we take up, for you doing therapy and mental health, for me being a chaplain with grief, all of us have these different lanes of artistry and healthcare and our expertise, whether that's on the street, literally being a protester on the ground, or within the boardroom, speaking up and saying this isn't right, or here's what we need to do. I hope that I can tell my children that I tried to move the needle as much as I could, because the needle of change, it's tough. It's really, really difficult to move, because the magnetic pole is always towards what's easiest, the path of least resistance, and what keeps pockets filled of those who are in those positions. But I just hope that I'm able to tell my children, I was a voice in a sea that wanted to drag people under. And I said, we can't do this. It can't be like this anymore. And when we look back, when we look at our ancestors, when we look at the people before us, the reason why we have the rights that we have now and the roads paved that we have now is because of people before us who did pay that cost to raise their voice. And sometimes when I say ancestors, I'm like, well, would my ancestors like me today? Because they had beliefs that probably weren't great either, you know, because they were a product, I guess, quote unquote, of their time. But at the same time, if we look at every period of time, the period of slavery, there were people who were against it from day one, from day zero. They knew that it was wrong. It wasn't that everyone bought into it. There were abolitionists even on the first day. And so when we look at all these different time periods, I hope that I can be remembered as someone who spoke into and was part of policy. And even if it was, I'm not in the rooms where the policy is made, that I'm shouting outside the window.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. I think so many times people can't see the impact of what they're doing, so they think their voice doesn't matter. I mean, think of how disempowered most people feel in the day-to-day life, right? You know, of their voice. And what you're describing to me, though, is this need to stay firmly planted in oneself and knowing that whatever we can do where we're at has to be enough. Even if we don't see the consequences of that action, knowing that if we're doing the right thing and we're being called to do it, that it is the right thing. There's so much opportunity, I think, for this collective impact that we forget that nobody is ever going to be able to do it all. We're literally all just doing what we can where we're at. as long as we're taking that, we're being active in that, in those actions, right? And taking a stance. And, it could be as simple as a conversation in a room where everybody's having a conversation that is wrong, that shouldn't be happening.
Yeah.
Like, that's one of the hardest, it's that personal, right? Like, that to me is so courageous, to have a conversation in a room that that 4 people that you care about may have some different feelings about you for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the accumulation of a lot of those conversations, it may not seem like a lot at the dinner table, but I think it can shift the cultural and social consciousness in a way.
Absolutely.
I mean, even like with my dad, who has very different political beliefs than I do. I think back 2 years ago when we were talking about, the murder of George Floyd. And I told my dad and stepmom, and I was with my wife at the time, we were having lunch or dinner. I told him about when I marched for Black Lives. And I went to several protests, and my dad was very upset about that. Said, how could you march for so-and-so, and don't you know what he did in his past life, etc. Those kind of talking points. And so we went back and forth for a bit. Now, to say that we went back and forth for a bit, my dad is someone, 9th degree black belt, he's a POW veteran of Vietnam War. I mean, he's someone that I never really speak up or talk with or back to at all.
Right.
Everything, I'd still say yes sir and no sir to him to this day. But that point I felt very strongly about. And I'm not changing policy, I'm not even maybe changing minds, but I felt like I need to let him know what I'm doing and what I stand for. And as we were talking, my stepmom, God bless her, she said, wait, didn't your great-grandfather, talking to me, wasn't he a revolutionary against the empire, in Korea? And kind of turned to my dad, and my dad fell silent. And there was a long pause. And I think what my stepmom was saying was, aren't you just doing what, your great-grandfather did? And then turned to my dad, basically what your grandfather did. And then my dad had this funny look on his face, and then suddenly he burst out laughing. It was almost like a laughter of, okay, I get what you're doing. And that was the end of the conversation. That was it. We didn't talk about it again. But I think he understood that in the continuum of history, there are always people who are trying. And no way am I comparing myself to my great-grandfather and the amazing work that he did as a revolutionary. But I think I mean to say that it's sort of the accumulation of these different voices at a dinner table or the boardroom.
Yes.
They're all important.
Yes.
Every voice matters. I think somebody told me online, this is not original thought, but somebody said, do drops of rain or do little drops in the ocean really matter? And then somebody told me, well, drops of water or drops of rain over one place over a long time can make a garden. And that, for me, remains true. And it's something that I've held on to.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, and I do. So I think for the people that are listening, sometimes we think it has to be like, I've got to march on Washington, I've got to, go out to this or that protest, which I think are beautiful. If you feel called to do that, I think it's a beautiful way to stand for what you're passionate about and for shifting the needle. But I also think that we can't underestimate the capacity of these personal conversations that we have within our families and with our friends, to have these difficult conversations, to be able to learn how to have these types of discussions, because this is where we can make a difference. Like, not necessarily because we're intending to, but because it feels right. Like, something inside me dies a little when I don't stand up for and use my voice in a time that I know what's being said doesn't feel right to me. I feel a personal responsibility, and you know me and my work, I don't know that I have it in me not to say something. I have this nudge that requires me to speak, but some of that is almost like a survival in me. Like I do feel like something in me dies.
Yeah.
And I can feel the pain in my body, the regret for not standing up for something that, whether it directly affects me or somebody else, oftentimes it's for standing up for somebody else.
Yeah.
But it's important when somebody's voice isn't in the room that needs to be represented to have some representation.
Yeah, and you know, and just to address that part of it, I think there's a double tax that many of us pay, especially marginalized folks, where, you know, we feel like we are up against a bombardment of whether it's bigotry or pull to status quo, or sort of a place in which marginalization continues. And so we suffer kind of 1,000 cuts or one big one, you know? And then there's another tax that we pay in which when we don't speak up in a situation and pay the labor of that, where there's guilt and even shame. Oh, should I have spoken up? Should I have said something? And so not only are we facing bigotry, we're facing guilt about not speaking up to that bigotry.
Right.
And so I think I say that to say, on some level, I think we need to be able to preserve our energy and pick our battles, like protect yourself, because there are times when speaking up, it is so crucial and important, but the word you use, survive, sometimes we do need to survive in a situation where we know there will be much harm that comes to us. And everyone needs to kind of pick those situations. I read something the other day, somebody mistakenly and falsely said, I celebrate today Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., who died for his beliefs. And then somebody commented, he didn't die for his beliefs, he was assassinated. And so he didn't willingly necessarily pay that cost.
Right.
He didn't die for his, he was killed. And so I say that to say, when you were saying there's a little part of you that dies inside, I wish and I hope for anyone who's watching or listening, including ourselves as well, that the guilt that we feel about not speaking up, that's a guilt that's placed on us. You know, because the bigotry should not exist in the first place. We should never have had to speak up to that.
Right.
It shouldn't exist. And so I think we can pick and choose our moments, and I think moment to moment, hopefully overall in the mosaic of our lives, we spoke up more than we didn't, and to not judge ourselves for when we didn't.
Right.
And as much as we can, to remain honest to ourselves in situations that call for it.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, as we've kind of talked about these different topics, how does somebody who is listening, how would you recommend somebody get more dialed in to even these feelings? I feel like naturally, because of who we are to a certain extent, we tend to be more empathic. But I think everybody has this natural inclination to experience what they're experiencing without necessarily understanding it completely, but wanting that desire to be connected, more connected in the world, even though they may not have language for it. But for me, if we're trying to be connected to other people, it starts with just being connected with ourselves.
Yeah.
Right? So when you're doing this work and you're seeing people that are maybe disconnected, right, from what they're experiencing, can you just talk a little bit about, like, I know you're more of a presence person, so you're just you're so genuinely in that moment with them that you're accepting that for what it is. But as a therapist, as a practitioner who's typically working with people who also are coming to me to change, do you have a lens on how you enter into spaces with people to continue to try to help them be more aware of even what they're experiencing or feeling?
Yeah, I think, and one more time a lasagna type answer.
Yeah.
But, you know, on one hand, I think it is important to recognize not everyone who, those who do not emote, I don't think they're necessarily out of touch with their feelings. I think everyone has a different range of where they feel the most. Meaning, I knew a guy who way back when, on Sundays when he would sing at church, he would just mouth the lyrics, because we went to church together. This was a long time ago. And when he would really like the song, he would just kind of do this with his, and then I thought, he's not, maybe these songs aren't good, or he doesn't really like them. But what I found out later as I was talking to him was, when he would mouth the lyrics and sometimes speak them, that was him redlining his emotions as high as it could go. And he was very emotional during those times. But the way that he expressed it was very different than someone else. So I think we do need to take it person by person and recognize that not everyone is going to emote the same way. And that when I see grief in a room, sometimes it's shouting, wailing, screaming, crying, venting, being angry. And then other times it's numbness, it's cognitive fog, no tears at all. But does that mean that they're not grieving? I don't believe that. I think that is the reaction that they need. But I would say for those who consciously have this thought, like feelings are not for me, or I don't do all that kind of inner work and all that stuff. I'm sure we've met many people like that. Or, if somebody is emoting, they'll kind of go, hey, calm down, or hey, be strong, or be tough, or don't, no time for tears, or something like that. If somebody's consciously kind of imbibing that philosophy, what I would ask is, what is the obstacle that keeps you from feeling those feelings? At least examining that, or asking the question. And usually that obstacle comes out of a voice that they've heard from somewhere, whether that's parents, whether that's the culture or environment that they're in, or whether that's the ladder they had to climb in order to be the position that they're in. Just stuff my emotions and then I can get to this place. And so examining that resistance, that obstacle, is so important. And you can't make anyone do that work. Right?
Absolutely.
You can't be anyone's Holy Spirit, I guess. Because sometimes when someone says, "Oh, that person needs therapy," it's used as an insult. I don't like saying that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm sure I've said it. I'm sure I've thought it at least. You can't make anyone go to therapy.
That's right.
You can't make anyone get in touch with their feelings or emote more or emote less. So I think there needs to be some sort of conversation or awareness around, is there something preventing you? And what I found out 99% of the time is those obstacles, that resistance, is born out of some kind of hurt or trauma, or a person hiding because they feel like they have to. And it's not because they don't want to necessarily, but it's because there's something there, a voice there that's suppressing. And so I think exploring that in a curious and compassionate way is the way to open that up.
Thank you. As we close our time, I think that's a beautiful way to kind of end, is this reflection of that each person, what you're describing is each person is going to have, is going to be grieving in their own way whenever there's suffering going on in the world, or whatever the circumstances are, or even having their own experience in general. And I think what you're talking about is this, in whatever way that we're relating to each other, is this real curiosity, as opposed to coming from this judgmental space, but really a genuine curiosity as to maybe what might be going on, not even with the desire to figure it out, but just from a space to increase our own internal compassion, to where we can show up and be present in a way that allows for there to be a range of reactions, given whatever's going on, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Right? That's
Absolutely.
okay. So thank you for being here and sharing this time together. It's always a joy. I could spend hours with you talking. I feel like I always come away from our time feeling more expansive in my own understanding and perspective. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you, Beth, for having me. And show everybody the notebook one more time. It's got this is the...
And a pen.
And a pen.
Old-fashioned pen.
This is amazing. I love
Real
it.
deal.
Thank you, Beth.
All right, thank you so much for being here, Joon. And as always, thank you to Micah McKenzie for the incredible cover art for Click Moments. And until next time, friends, peace, love, and joy.
Do with these words what you will. It's time for us to be be for real, you'll be stuck on the ground until you finally break the shell.